The crystal glass in her hand tilted, a perfect, mocking angle that caught the light of the chandelier and fractured it into 100 tiny, sharp daggers. Su Jin's laughter followed, a sound just as sharp, just as cutting. It sliced through the opulent silence of the penthouse dining room, a room built on the bones of Dae-hyun's father's empire, a room that had always felt more like a mausoleum than a home. On the floor, amidst the shattered remains of a wine glass and a spreading stain of crimson that looked unnervingly like blood on the pale marble, Mrs. Park struggled to her knees. The elderly maid, a woman who had served his family since before he was born, who had once sneaked him honey cakes when his father's temper had soured the household, was trembling. Humiliation and pain warred on her wrinkled face, and his fiancée, the woman chosen to seal a pact between two powerful families, laughed. Kang Dae-hyun's world did not so much as stop as it did clarify, with the brutal, absolute focus of a sniper's scope. In the cold, cruel sound of Su Jin's amusement, he saw the entirety of his future laid out before him, a barren landscape of strategic alliances, loveless nights, and the slow, grinding death of the last good part of himself. He had been walking this path for months, a ghost in his own life, believing he had nothing left to lose. He was wrong. He had his soul to lose. And in that moment of terrible clarity, another face appeared in his mind's eye, unbidden and achingly vivid. Lena. Her face when she'd been sketching on a cheap napkin, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek, her brow furrowed in fierce concentration. Her face when she'd looked at him not with fear or avarice, but with a wary curiosity that had chipped away at the ice around his heart. Her kindness, a quiet, stubborn thing that had felt more valuable than all the gold piled in his vaults. Su Jin's laughter finally sputtered out as she noticed his expression. The air grew thick, heavy with a menace she was only just beginning to comprehend. Dae-hyun moved. He did not spare his fiancée another glance. He rounded the table in 3 long strides and knelt on the wine-soaked marble. His hands that had signed death warrants and broken men, were impossibly gentle as he helped Mrs. Park to her feet. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, devoid of the cold command it usually held. It was just a man's voice, raw with concern. She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear, not of her fall, but of him, of the consequences. "No, Master Kang, I am so sorry, so clumsy." "It was an accident," he said, his gaze finally flicking to Su Jin. The warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial cold that made her flinch. "Go home." "Dae-hyun," she began, her tone a mixture of shock and indignation. "It was just a clumsy old—" "Go home," he repeated, each word a perfectly formed shard of ice. He did not raise his voice. He never had to. The absolute authority in it was enough. She stared, her mouth opening and closing before she finally snapped it shut. She grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with fury, and stormed from the room. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, sealing the silence once more. Dae-hyun turned his attention back to Mrs. Park, guiding her to a chair. "Min-jun will see you home. Take the rest of the week off. Paid." He walked to the sprawling window that overlooked the glittering, indifferent city. He was the king of this city, the head of the Black Lotus Syndicate, a man whose name was a whisper of fear and respect. And he was utterly, miserably alone. He had let Lena go to protect her, and in doing so had condemned himself to this hollow existence. He looked down at the platinum band on Su Jin's chair, the massive diamond winking obscenely. A ring to seal a loveless cage. He had accepted it. He had been willing to lock the door himself. No more. Later that night, the ring was returned, delivered by his lieutenant, Min-jun, with a message that was as brief as it was final. The alliance was broken. The engagement was over. It was an act of war against the old guard, a declaration that the king was finally, truly, taking his throne. And he would burn the kingdom to the ground if it meant he could build one worthy of the woman who haunted his every waking thought. 6 months earlier, that woman had been wiping down a sticky table in a restaurant that smelled of stale beer and desperation. Lena Petrova felt the familiar ache in her lower back, a constant companion in her life of double shifts and deferred dreams. Her first job of the day, waitressing at this diner, was ending. Her second, serving canapés at a sterile corporate gala, was about to begin. Between them, she had exactly 45 minutes to inhale a sandwich and pretend she was a person and not just a collection of tired limbs and mounting bills. She slumped into a booth in the back, pulling a crumpled napkin from her apron pocket along with a stub of charcoal pencil. She began to sketch. A line here, a curve there. The image in her head was a dress, elegant and fluid, a cascade of fabric that seemed to defy gravity. It was a fantasy, a world away from her grease-stained apron and worn-out shoes. But on the napkin, it was real. Her art was the one part of her life that was truly hers, the one thing that hadn't been pawned or compromised. Her roommate, Chloe, insisted she was a brilliant designer trapped in a working-class struggle. Lena just thought she was a dreamer who needed to wake up and pay the rent. Still, she sketched. It was as necessary as breathing. The bell over the diner door jingled, but she didn't look up. It was probably just her boss, Sal, coming to tell her she'd missed a spot. "Is that seat taken?" The voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated through the cracked vinyl of the booth. It was smooth, cultured, and utterly out of place. Lena looked up, her sarcastic retort dying on her lips. The man standing there was like a figure from a different reality. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her entire year's rent, tailored so perfectly it seemed woven onto his frame. He was tall, with broad shoulders and an air of coiled stillness, of immense power held in effortless check. His face was a masterpiece of sharp angles and severe beauty, marred only by a thin white scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a detail that made him look dangerous rather than flawed. And he was looking at her, not at her body, not with the lazy, entitled appraisal she was used to from men. He was looking at her face, at the napkin in her hand, with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. Lena felt a jolt, a strange, unnerving connection that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She immediately threw up her defenses. "Looks free to me," she said, her voice betraying none of the sudden tremor in her stomach. She gestured vaguely at the seat opposite her. "The whole place is yours, pal." He didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. He slid into the booth, his movements fluid and precise. He didn't look at the menu. He just watched her, his dark eyes unnervingly perceptive. "What are you drawing?" She instinctively covered the napkin with her hand. "The schematics for a nuclear reactor. It's a side hustle." This time, he did smile. It was a small, quiet thing, but it transformed his face, hinting at a warmth buried deep beneath the ice. It was a smile like a punch to the chest. "I doubt that." "You'd be surprised," she shot back, her wariness battling a strange, unfamiliar curiosity. "Who was this man? What do you want? Coffee's terrible, and the pie is a science experiment." "I don't want coffee," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I want your name." The directness of it startled her. There was no sleazy pickup line, no game. Just a simple, powerful demand. It should have been arrogant. It should have made her angry. Instead, it made her heart skip a beat. "Why?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Because I saw you from across the room, and the world stopped for a moment," he said, the words utterly sincere. "And I would like to know the name of the woman who can do that." Dae-hyun felt the words leave his mouth before he'd fully processed them. He never spoke like this. His words were weapons, tools, shields. They were never windows. But looking at her with her defiant eyes and the stubborn set of her jaw, he felt an impulse he hadn't felt in years, the desire to be honest. He had walked into the gala that evening feeling the usual suffocating emptiness. It was a room full of predators and parasites, all circling, smiling with too many teeth. His life was a gilded cage, and he was rattling the bars from the inside. He'd been scanning the crowd, his mind cataloging threats, assessing weaknesses, the usual grim calculus of his existence, when his eyes had caught her. She was on the periphery, a ghost in a server's uniform, but she burned brighter than anyone in the room. It wasn't just her appearance, a captivating face with high cheekbones and eyes the color of moss after a rain. It was her stillness. In a room buzzing with false energy, she was a pocket of absolute, authentic focus. He watched her for 20 minutes, mesmerized by the way she moved, the efficient grace of her work, the exhaustion she couldn't quite hide, and the moment she stole for herself, sketching on a napkin as if the world around her didn't exist. Something inside him, a part he thought long dead, had stirred. A profound, inexplicable recognition. He had to know her, so he'd followed her. A discreet word to his lieutenant, Min Jun, had given him the location of her first job. Walking into the grimy diner felt like stepping onto another planet, but she was there, and she was even more intoxicating up close. Her sarcasm was a shield, he could see that. A well-honed defense against a world that had likely given her little reason to be soft. It didn't deter him. It fascinated him. "Lena," she finally said, her voice softer now. "My name is Lena." "Lena," he repeated, tasting the name. It felt right. "I am Dae-hyun." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card case. The card he slid across the table was heavy, black linen stock with his name embossed in silver. No title, no company, just his name and a number. She glanced at it, her eyebrow raising at the obvious expense. "And what am I supposed to do with this, Dae-hyun?" "Call me," he said simply. "Or don't." "But I hope you do." He stood, the strange spell between them breaking. He placed a $100 bill on the table. "For the pie." Then he was gone, the bell over the door jingling his exit. Lena stared at the $100 bill, then at the impossibly elegant business card. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. What in the world just happened? She picked up the card, the weight of it feeling significant in her palm. Her first instinct was to tear it up. Men like that, men with expensive suits and an aura of dangerous power, were trouble. They were a different species. They consumed women like her for sport. But he hadn't been like that. He'd been intense and strangely gentle. The world stopped for a moment. The words echoed in her head. She scoffed, a nervous, breathy sound. It was a line. It had to be a line. But as she tucked the card carefully into her wallet instead of the trash, a small, treacherous part of her hoped it wasn't. Dae-hyun sat in the back of his armored sedan, the city lights smearing past the tinted windows. He didn't feel the usual cold satisfaction after a successful meeting or the weary tension of a day spent navigating his treacherous world. He felt unsettled, hopeful. It was a foreign and unnerving sensation. "Find out everything you can about her," he said to the empty air. Min Jun's voice came through the car's discreet intercom. "Lena Petrova, art student, dropout, works 2 jobs. Roommate is Chloe Benson, no family in the city, clean record, significant debt." The information was delivered with his usual emotionless efficiency. Dae-hyun's jaw tightened at the mention of her debt. The world was crushing a spirit like hers over something as trivial as money. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in his mouth. "Is she in any danger?" "Only from the usual predators, sir. Landlords and loan companies. Nothing the Black Lotus needs to concern itself with." "I am concerned with it," Dae-hyun said, his voice sharp. He thought for a moment. He couldn't just pay off her debts. A woman like Lena would see it as an insult, a cage disguised as a gift. He had to be smarter than that. He had to be better. "Send flowers to her apartment," he instructed. No card, just a single Black Lotus. There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, is that wise?" "It's our symbol." "It's my symbol," Dae-hyun corrected him. "I want her to know it's from me." He didn't know why it was so important, but it was. He wanted her to connect him not with the name on the news, but with the man who had sat across from her in a cheap diner. Lena arrived home that night to find Chloe bouncing on the balls of her feet, her eyes wide. "You have a secret admirer!" On their rickety kitchen table, in a cheap vase Chloe had obviously just bought, was a flower. But it was unlike any flower Lena had ever seen. It was a lotus, its petals the color of a moonless midnight, so dark they seemed to drink the light from the room. It was exquisitely beautiful and deeply unsettling. "Who sent it?" Lena asked, her stomach twisting. "No idea, no card. It was just delivered. Isn't it romantic? It's so gothic and mysterious," Chloe gushed. Lena touched a petal. It felt like cool silk, a black lotus. It felt significant, a symbol. Her mind immediately went to the man in the diner. Dae-hyun. It had to be him. The gesture was as bold and strange as he was. "This isn't romantic, Chloe," Lena said, though her voice lacked conviction. "This is creepy. He knows where I live." "He's being attentive," Chloe argued. "Give the handsome, mysterious rich guy a chance." Lena spent the next 2 days in a state of heightened awareness. Every black car that drove past her street seemed to slow down. She felt watched. It was terrifying. And yet she hadn't thrown away his card. It sat in her wallet, a heavy rectangular promise of something. On the 3rd day, she was behind the counter at her other job, a small, independent coffee shop, when the bell chimed. And there he was. This time, he was dressed down in dark jeans and a simple, perfectly fitting gray sweater. Without the armor of his suit, he looked younger, more approachable, but no less intense. The power was still there, an aura that clung to him like a second skin. He walked to the counter, and the handful of other customers seemed to unconsciously give him a wide berth. He ignored them, his eyes fixed on her. "Lena," he said, his voice a low thrum. "Dae-hyun," she replied, her voice tight. "Fancy seeing you here. Are you lost? The part of town where people wear $1,000 sweaters is about 10 miles that way." His mouth twitched. "I came for coffee." "I hear it's better than the pie at the diner." "The standards are low," she quipped, her hands busy making a latte she didn't remember someone ordering. Her movements were automatic. Her entire consciousness was focused on him. "What can I get you?" "Dinner," he said. "With me, tonight." "I'm busy," she said automatically. "Tomorrow, then." Busy. The day after. He was relentless, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't asking. He was waiting. Lena sighed, wiping the counter with more force than necessary. "This is creepy, you know. The flowers. Knowing where I work. Is any of this legal?" "Probably not," he admitted without a trace of remorse. "I apologize if I frightened you. That was not my intention. I am unpracticed at this." The admission surprised her. Him? Unpracticed? He seemed to command the very air he breathed. The flicker of vulnerability was disarming. "What exactly is this?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Me," he said, gesturing between them. "Trying to convince the most interesting woman I've ever met to have dinner with me." Damn him. Damn that sincerity that cut right through her armor. "One dinner," she found herself saying. "And no creepy flowers, and you don't get to pick me up. I'll meet you there." A genuine, brilliant smile lit up his face. It was like the sun breaking through a bank of storm clouds. Agreed. He named a place, not a stuffy Michelin-starred restaurant, but a quiet, little Italian place in a neighborhood she knew, and he told her to wear whatever she wanted. As he left, Lena leaned against the counter, her knees weak. Chloe, who had been watching from the back room with wide eyes, rushed out. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You are going on that date." Lena looked at the door he'd just walked through. "I think I am," she whispered back, a sense of both dread and exhilarating excitement warring within her. The date was surprising. Dae-hyun was a surprisingly good listener. He asked about her designs, her dreams, her frustrations. He didn't talk about himself much, deflecting her questions with a practiced ease, but he seemed to genuinely want to know about her. He looked at her sketches, which she'd brought in her bag just in case, with a reverence that made her blush. "You're incredibly talented," he said, his voice soft. The world should see this. No one had ever said that to her with such conviction. Her mother worried, her friends encouraged, but he stated it like a fact, like a law of nature. Over the next few weeks, one dinner turned into two, then into late-night walks and stolen afternoons. He slowly, carefully entered her world. He never pushed, never overwhelmed, but his presence was a constant, a steadying force. He'd show up at her coffee shop and just sit and read for an hour, a silent guardian she found herself looking for. One day, he took her to a sprawling, light-filled loft space downtown. It was empty, a blank canvas of polished concrete floors and massive windows. "What is this place?" she asked, turning a slow circle. "It's yours," he said simply. Lena froze. "What? No, no, I can't accept this. This is too much." The cage. She could feel the bars of the pretty cage closing in. "It's not a gift," he said quickly, seeing the panic in her eyes. "It's an investment. I want to be your first patron. Pay me back when you're a world-famous designer. With interest." He tried to make it sound like a business proposition, but his eyes were pleading. She stared at him, at the raw hope on his face. He wasn't trying to buy her. He was trying to help her. He believed in her. She didn't know what to say. The wariness was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but it was being drowned out by the rising tide of her feelings for him. She was falling in love with this strange, intense, lonely man. "Just think about it," he said softly. She did more than think about it. The next day, she started moving her supplies in. For the first time, she had space. She had light. She had the freedom to create, and it was intoxicating. Their romance deepened into something fierce and undeniable. In his arms, she felt safe for the first time in her life. The constant, grinding worry about money and survival began to fade. He was gentle with her, passionate, and possessive in a way that should have been frightening, but instead felt like being anchored in a storm. But the darkness was always there, at the edges. The way he would go still and cold when his phone buzzed with a particular tone. The men who shadowed them from a distance, their faces hard and emotionless. The way he would sometimes look at her with a profound sadness in his eyes, as if he were already mourning something. One night, they were lying in her bed in her small apartment. It was the one place that felt more hers than his. He liked it there. He said it was quiet. "Dae-hyun," she began, tracing the line of the scar over his eyebrow. "You never told me how you got this." He went still, his whole body tensed. "It's not a pleasant story." "Tell me," she urged gently. "Tell me about you, the real you, not just the man who buys me art studios. Who are you?" He pulled away, sitting up on the edge of the bed, his back to her. The muscles in his shoulders were knotted with tension. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the distant wail of a siren. For Dae-hyun, this was the moment he had been dreading, the precipice. He had built this small, perfect world with her, a bubble of light in his dark life. He knew the truth would burst it. Min-jun had warned him, his voice flat and pragmatic. "Love is a liability in our world, Dae-hyun. An outsider is a weakness. She makes you a target." "She makes me human," Dae-hyun had retorted. "Humans in our profession die," Min-jun had replied, his loyalty warring with his concern. Dae-hyun looked at his hands. Hands that had done terrible things to protect the empire his father had built on blood and fear. An empire he had inherited, a crown of thorns he'd never asked for. Could these same hands hold someone as good and pure as Lena? He had to tell her. To lie, even by omission, was to dishonor what they had. She deserved the truth, and he had to face the consequences. He turned to face her. Her face was full of concern, her beautiful eyes searching his. The love he felt for her was a physical ache in his chest, a terrifying, exhilarating pain. "My name," he began, his voice rough, "is Kang Dae-hyun. You know that. What you don't know is what that name means in this city." He told her everything, He started with his father, the ruthless founder of the Black Lotus Syndicate. He told her about the empire he inherited at 22 when his father was sent to prison for life. He didn't spare her the ugly details, the extortion, the smuggling, the violence that was the bedrock of his power and wealth. He explained that the beautiful loft, the effortless safety she felt, was all paid for by the proceeds of a criminal enterprise. "I am not a good man, Lena," he finished, his voice hollow. "I am the leader of a crime family. The money, the power. It all comes from darkness. That scar." He touched his eyebrow. "A gift from a rival when I was 19. A reminder of what this world does to you." He laid his soul bare, offering her the ugly, brutal truth of his existence. He watched her face, waiting for the horror, the disgust, the inevitable rejection. Lena felt the world tilt on its axis. The air left her lungs. Every hushed phone call, every shadowy figure, every flicker of darkness she'd sensed in him clicked into place, forming a picture of terrifying clarity. A crime boss, a mafia kingpin, the man she loved, the man who was so gentle with her, was a part of that world. He was that world. The safety he had given her was an illusion, built on the suffering of others. The studio wasn't a gift, it was blood money. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. It wasn't fear, it was heartbreak. A profound, shattering grief for the man she thought she knew, for the love she thought she'd found. She started, but her voice broke. She saw the agony in his eyes. He wasn't a monster. He was a man trapped in a monstrous life. And that, somehow, was even worse. "I can't," she whispered, the words tearing from her throat. "Dae-hyun, I can't do this. I can't be with you. Not like this." Her principles, the very core of who she was, screamed at her. She had been raised to believe in honesty, in hard work, in being a good person. She couldn't reconcile that with his world. She couldn't look at herself in the mirror knowing her happiness was funded by crime and violence. "I love you," she sobbed, the confession ripped from her. "But I can't be your queen in a kingdom of shadows." Dae-hyun felt her words like a physical blow. He had expected it, but the reality was 1,000 times worse. He saw the love in her tear-filled eyes, and he saw her pulling away. He had given her the truth, and the truth had destroyed them. He wanted to beg, to promise he could change, but how could he? The syndicate was a beast with 1,000 tentacles. It was his legacy, his duty, his prison. To leave it would be to start a war, to put a target on his back and on the back of anyone he cared about. On her. So he did the only thing he could, the hardest thing he had ever done. He let her go. He stood up, his movements stiff. "I understand." The words were ash in his mouth. He walked to the door of her small, safe apartment, a paradise he had just irrevocably poisoned. He paused with his hand on the knob, his back to her. "I will always protect you, Lena," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "Even from me." And then he was gone. Lena collapsed onto the bed, her body racked with sobs. The silence he left behind was a deafening roar, the sound of her world breaking apart. The days that followed were a gray, featureless fog for Lena. She packed her things and left the studio, leaving the key on the clean, empty floor. She couldn't create there anymore. She found a new apartment, smaller and darker than her last one, with a new roommate who was a stranger. She told Chloe she just needed a change. She couldn't bring herself to tell her friend the truth. How could she explain that the man she loved was a gangster? She threw herself into her work with a desperate, frantic energy. She took on more shifts at the coffee shop, her hands constantly moving, her mind blessedly numb. She sketched, but the joy was gone. The lines were still clean, the designs still elegant, but they felt hollow, lifeless. One day, the owner of a small, trendy boutique came into the coffee shop. She noticed Lena's sketches tucked behind the counter and asked to see them. A week later, the boutique was carrying 3 of her dresses. It was the break she had been dreaming of her entire life. She stood outside the shop window, looking at her creation on a mannequin. She should have been ecstatic. She should have been calling Chloe, screaming with joy. Instead, she just felt a profound, aching emptiness. This success, this first step towards her dream, was something she couldn't share with him. The triumph felt hollow because he wasn't there to see it. She found herself scanning crowds for a tall man in a perfect suit. Every black sedan that passed made her heart leap into her throat. She was living in the city he ruled, breathing his air, and the separation was a constant, open wound. For Dae-hyun, life without Lena was a return to the Arctic void he had inhabited before her, only colder. The brief warmth she had brought into his life only made the subsequent chill more unbearable. He was a king back on his throne of ice, and the loneliness was a physical weight. He became more ruthless, more decisive. He crushed a rival family's encroachment on his territory with a brutal efficiency that frightened even his own men. He expanded his empire, his mind a sharp, cold instrument of strategy and power. But the victories brought no satisfaction. The power felt like dust in his hands. He kept his promise. From a distance, he watched over her. He had Min-jun arrange for the boutique owner to randomly visit her coffee shop. He ensured her new apartment was in a safe building, quietly buying the entire floor through a shell corporation to keep problematic neighbors away. He was a ghost in her life, a guardian angel with a tarnished halo, and she never knew. Min-jun watched his friend and boss retreat further into himself. "This is no way to live, Dae-hyun," he said one night, standing in the sterile office of the penthouse. "You are a ghost." "I am what I have to be," Dae-hyun replied, his eyes fixed on the city lights below. He was looking in the direction of her new apartment. "She was good for you," Min-jun stated. It was the closest he would ever come to sentimentality. "And I was poison for her," Dae-hyun said, his voice flat. "This is better." But he didn't believe it. Every night he remembered the feel of her hand in his, the sound of her laughter, the fierce concentration on her face when she sketched. He was the most powerful man in the city, and he had never felt so powerless. It was in this state of soul-crushing apathy that he agreed to his family's demands. The old guard, loyalists to his father's brutal way of doing things, had been pushing for an alliance with the Choi family. It would solidify their power, quell dissent within the ranks. The price of the alliance was his hand in marriage to the eldest daughter, Choi Soo-jin. He had met her once. She was beautiful, cold, and ambitious. She looked at him and saw power, a stepping stone. She was a perfect queen for his kingdom of shadows. With Lena gone, it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. So he agreed. The engagement was announced. A ring was purchased. A dinner was planned. He was walking willingly back into the cage, ready to lock the door and throw away the key. He told himself it was his duty. He told himself it was the only path left. Then came the night of the dinner. The night a glass of wine was spilled. The night an old woman fell. The night his fiancée laughed. And in the sound of that cruel, careless laughter, Kang Dae-hyun woke up. The act of returning the ring was more than just breaking an engagement. It was a declaration of independence. It was him, finally, choosing his own path, not the one his father had laid out for him. It was a choice for Lena, even if she never knew it. He stood before the window of his penthouse, the city sprawling beneath him, and he saw it not as a kingdom to rule, but as a battlefield. Min-jun entered the room, his face grim. "The Chois are taking it as an act of war. Your father's loyalists are calling it a betrayal. They will move against you." "Let them," Dae-hyun said, his voice calm, but with a new fire burning in his eyes. The cold apathy was gone, replaced by a formidable resolve. "I'm done with my father's legacy." "What are you going to do?" Min-jun asked, though he already suspected the answer. He had seen the change in Dae-hyun, the return of a purpose he thought long dead. "I'm going to burn it to the ground," Dae-hyun said. "The Black Lotus Syndicate dies tonight. We're going legitimate." Min-jun's stoic composure finally broke. He stared at his friend. "Dae-hyun, that's impossible. It's suicide. The roots are too deep. The other families, the police, the politicians, they won't allow it. It will be a bloodbath. Then it will be a bloodbath, Dae-hyun stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. We cut off the rot, Min-jun, all of it. The smuggling, the extortion, the violence. We sell the assets, we absorb the losses. We will build a new company from the ashes, a legitimate global logistics and investment firm, something clean. For her, Min-jun said. It wasn't a question. Dae-hyun's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. For me, to become a man who is worthy of a future with someone like her. He was not just changing his business, he was attempting to redeem his soul. It was his grand gesture, a penance paid not in words, but in fire and blood and immense risk. He had to dismantle the very source of his power to build a life he could ask her to share. The next few months were chaos. As Min-jun predicted, it was a war. The Chois tried to assassinate him twice. The first time, a car bomb was discovered by his security team. The second, a sniper's bullet shattered the window of his office, missing his head by inches. His father's old guard staged a coup, which he crushed with strategic, ruthless precision, dismantling their power base not with bullets, but with financial ruin, leveraging their own dirty secrets against them. He was a general conducting a brutal corporate takeover of his own life. He worked relentlessly, sleeping only a few hours a night, fueled by coffee and a desperate, burning hope. He methodically sold off nightclubs, laundered money streams, and illicit shipping routes. He fired 2/3 of his personnel, keeping only those, like Min-jun, who were loyal to him and not the old ways. He faced down threats, navigated betrayals, and poured his fortune into building KD Global, a corporation with a clean ledger and a legitimate future. Lena heard whispers of the storm raging in the city's underbelly. News reports spoke of a violent power struggle, of the old criminal organizations crumbling. The name Kang was sometimes mentioned. Every time she heard it, a cold fear gripped her. She pictured Dae-hyun in the middle of it all, and she prayed to a god she wasn't sure she believed in to keep him safe. Her own life was moving forward. The boutique owner had introduced her to more people. Her small brand, Petrova, was gaining a cult following. She had her own studio again, a small but bright space she'd paid for with her own earnings. She was succeeding. She was becoming the woman Dae-hyun had always believed she could be. But every night, she went home to her empty apartment, and the silence was a reminder of what she had lost. Her success felt like a beautiful dress with a tear in the seam, a constant, nagging imperfection. One evening, nearly a year after she had last seen him, she was working late at her studio. She was draping fabric on a mannequin, lost in her work, when she felt a presence. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Dae-hyun. He looked different. The impeccable suit was gone, replaced by simple dark trousers and a black cashmere sweater. He was thinner, and there were new lines of exhaustion around his eyes, but the dangerous edge was gone. The coiled violence that had always simmered beneath his surface had been replaced by a profound weariness and something else, a quiet, steady hope. He didn't move, just stood there, his eyes drinking her in. "Lena," he said, his voice rough, as if he hadn't used it for a long time. She took a hesitant step forward. "Dae-hyun, are you okay?" "I am now," he said, a small, tired smile touching his lips. "Your studio is beautiful. You built this." "I did," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "The Black Lotus Syndicate is gone," he said, the words simple but monumental. "It's over. I run a company now. KD Global. We move cargo and invest in tech startups. It's boring and legal and a financial nightmare." He let out a dry chuckle. "The past will always be a part of my story. I can't erase the man I was or the things I've done. But the future is clean. I dismantled my father's kingdom, Lena. I built something new." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading, vulnerable, stripped of all his former power. "I did it for me, because I couldn't live in that world anymore, not after knowing you. But I hoped it would make me worthy of standing here, in your world of light. Tears were streaming down her face again, but this time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking relief. She saw the truth of his sacrifice in the weariness of his face, in the scars, both old and new. He hadn't just changed his life. He had waged war on his own soul and won. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps. Her hands came up to cup his face, her thumbs tracing the tired lines around his eyes, the faint line of his scar. He was real. He was here. He was free. "You were always worthy," she whispered, and then she kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, hungry collision of mouths and souls, a year of pain and longing and unspoken love pouring out in a single, frantic moment. It was the end of their separation and the explosive beginning of their future. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet, holding her as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the world. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of homecoming, of a promise finally kept. A year later, the light from the chandeliers sparkled on champagne glasses, but this time the light felt warm, not sharp. Lena stood beside Dae-hyun, her hand resting comfortably in his. She was wearing one of her own designs, a dress of deep emerald silk that had been featured in a magazine last month. She was no longer just a designer, she was a name. Dae-hyun, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looked every bit the powerful CEO he now was. The intensity was still there, but it was softer, tempered by a constant, quiet happiness that seemed to emanate from him whenever he looked at her. They were at a charity gala, an event raising money for city arts programs. At their table sat Chloe, who was beaming, and Min-jun, who looked as stoic as ever, though Lena could see the genuine affection in his eyes when he looked at Dae-hyun. Also at their table was a smiling, happily retired Mrs. Park, looking elegant in a dress Lena had designed for her personally. Dae-hyun had given her a pension that ensured she would live out her days in comfort and dignity. "You seem happy," Lena murmured, leaning her head on his shoulder. Dae-hyun turned to her, his gaze full of a love so profound it still sometimes took her breath away. "I have a world of light to live in," he said, his voice low and for her ears only. He gently kissed her temple. "How could I be anything else?" The past was not forgotten. The scars remained, a reminder of the darkness they had overcome. But they had built a new life, a new kingdom not of shadows, but of light, love, and a redemption that had been earned in fire and faith. Together, they were whole. This story teaches us that true love isn't about finding a perfect person, but about inspiring each other to become the best versions of ourselves. It explores the powerful theme of redemption, showing that no one is beyond saving when motivated by a love that demands integrity and change. Dae-hyun's journey from a man trapped by a dark legacy to one who dismantles his entire world for a chance at a worthy future illustrates that the greatest power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. Lena's unwavering principles serve as a moral compass, proving that true strength is not about accepting darkness, but about inspiring light. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story highlights the difficult choices we face when our hearts conflict with our values and the incredible transformations that can occur when we choose to fight for a better future, both for ourselves and for the ones we love. If you were moved by Dae-hyun and Lena's journey, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more dramatic stories, and sharing this video with someone who appreciates a tale of love and redemption. Now, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Do you think Lena was right to leave Dae-hyun initially, or should she have stayed and tried to change him from within? What would you have done in her position? And for our next story, which character's journey would you like to explore? Let us know by voting in the comments. Should we tell the story of A. Min-jun, the loyal lieutenant, who finds an unexpected love that challenges his stoic and dutiful nature? Or B. Chloe, the supportive best friend, who gets swept up in her own whirlwind adventure after a chance encounter with a mysterious stranger?